concept. There are as many as 20 different concepts of species. We will look at maybe 3 or 4 of those. And then one, the biological species concept with using reproductivity is the one that we will be using most of our discussions. We will address that one. Do you recognize this bird? No? You don't. You recognize it as a bird, correct? Okay. That's a start. Never take anything for granted. Okay. We have this kind of a bird off our in the area. Okay. You can go to any one of our lakes, and you can see this bird. You can go to the ocean and see lots of these. When we go to Monterey, you'll see lots of these. But there will be a difference. The ones that we see off the coast here look a little different than this. Okay? What do you think this bird can no longer do? Fly. Can't fly. Look at those wings. You think that thing, look how heavy this is. This thing is not going to be able to fly. Although the ones off this coast fly very nicely. And they dive into the water. They can sit on the water like a duck. They can fly from place to place. They can fly from coast to ocean. They fly very well. But these are found in Galapagos Islands. Now, do you know where the Galapagos Islands are located? Anyone? Okay, the western coast of South America, about 600 miles off the coast of Ecuador. On the coast of Ecuador, they have cormorants, which is what this is. They have cormorants, but those cormorants can fly. Okay? Now, the cormorants eat fish. Okay? Ecuador has lots of predators. They have snakes. They have mammals, predatory mammals that like to eat birds. And they have other birds that like to catch birds in the air and then down them and eat them. The Galapagos Islands do not have predators of such. They don't have anything that would harm, other than a shark, that would harm a cormorant. And the Ecuadorian cormorants also have to worry about sharks. Okay. But if a shark is seen, the Ecuadorian cormorant just simply flies to another place. In fact, I've seen that happen off the coast here with gulls. I watched this gull for about a half hour. And the gull was sitting there, and a fin popped up, a blue shark, and it started to circle, inching its way in. The seagull just sort of looks over. I'm going, oh, this is going to be interesting. I get to see a gull eaten by a shark. Well, as soon as the shark got close enough, the gull just simply flew, a few feet off, maybe about 50 feet off, 100 feet off, out in another direction. So the shark picks up the scent, and of course the shark is always down current of the scent. So the positions, and whether the gull learned that or not, I don't know. That's for another study. But the shark would always be down current. The gull would always land and keep an eye on the shark. The shark get close enough, would fly away. The ones that have to worry about sharks are the penguins, because they don't fly. So they have to make it from ocean to the land without the use of air. And they're the ones usually caught by sharks. Anyway, what does it look like this bird is doing?
drying its wings?
It's drying its wings. It's not flapping its wings. The cormorants off our coast here, when they're done flying, they have to put their wings out and dry them out. And then they apply a little layer of oil from their oil glands, and they preen their feathers, and they prepare them for flight. It's one of the expensive things that you have to do for flight. Okay. Now these are fish eaters, so they're more concerned about swimming for their food. They don't catch fish in the air. Okay. They don't have to fly to trees or anything like that. However, they still insist on drying their wings for flight, because that instinct was not bred out of them. But evolutionarily, it's better if you have smaller wings, you can swim better, you can catch more fish. They have to compete with California sea lions, sort of the ones off the coast here, but there's a lot of it. It's more complex. More complex. So, this is a form of evolution. Evolution meaning it's the same, comes from an ancestor from another place and has adapted to the environment it lives in. There's two types of evolution. Speciation is where we talk about the origin of a new species. But there's two types. There's macro and micro, and you've heard about this in your other class. Micro is small changes, usually genetic frequencies. For example, if our population here has a frequency of blood type O being, let's say, 80%, and then we come back later, there are some selective forces, let's say, and we come back later, and your generations later are now sitting in this room, and now the frequency of the O-type blood is 50%. That's evolution, a change in gene frequencies. You can still breed, it's just that your populations have modified somewhat. You haven't quite speciated yet, so it's still evolution. Not all evolution leads to speciation. Macroevolution is where we get speciation and above. And when we get something so different that we can call them new species, and so different that they become where we have to put them in another category. Okay, we have to put them in another genus, another family, another order, another class. Those larger pieces of evolution are called macroevolution. So, what do we consider as a new species? What definition? This is the one that you're used to. This is the one that relies on interbreeding, being able to still integrate. In other words, the genetics is so close between the two species, two forming species, that they can still interbreed among themselves. But obviously there's differences. If you were to take a DNA analysis, one's DNA will be different than the other's DNA. But not different enough to modify the number of chromosomes or other factors to where that organism can still breed. So, what do you see here? Birds. Okay. Believe it or not, they're different species. Okay, they are different species. What keeps them a different species? Well, one lives on the eastern side of the United States, and the other one lives on the western side. That's a big help. Okay. However, because there's such a difference between the two, they don't really have to worry about looking too different. There's not going to be a mix-up in populations. However, you can tell they're different species because one has a different song than the others. And of course, if you did a genetic analysis, you could tell one's DNA is a little different than the other. Okay? So these are considered different species, but they look almost identical. Okay? Now, believe it or not, this is one species. There's a whole lot more difference than in the last species. Although these can still interbreed and produce viable offspring, and they do. the populations are close together. So in other words, looking at the morphology or looking at the differences in shape may not necessarily tell us that it's a different species. It goes deeper than that. Okay? It goes along with their ability to interbreed in this case. So, in order to produce a species, we need to have some kind of isolation, reproductive isolation. And it's a barrier of some sort, and if you separate something long enough, then they will be enhanced or influenced by their environments, and they will then produce different genetics, and those genetics will be selected for or not, and you will see larger numbers in a population that are more adapted to that particular environment. Once in a while, they haven't differed enough, and they can still come together and they can still produce a hybrid. In other words, they can still mate and actually produce an offspring. But the offspring may or may not be viable. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a little while. But anyway, you can produce hybrids when they're close enough. So, how do we reproductively isolate the organisms? That comes to the words that we were looking at before, prezygotic barriers and post-zygotic barriers. So right now, everyone should know what a zygote is and what happens before and after the zygote. Okay? So, this is a block of fertilization from occurring. Okay? And so it prevents successful completion of mating, hinders fertilization, doesn't allow those two gametes to successfully produce a zygote. Okay, it's basically what's happening. And in your book, they list a number of them. Okay? Then they have names for them. The first one's called habitat isolation. Basically, let's go through these one by one. Habitat isolation, the two species come with each other only rarely, because they usually like favor different habitat. They only encounter each other just very rarely. So here is a snake, garter snake. And where do you think this thing likes to live and hunt for food? It likes to live near ponds. Okay. And you can see it probably eats little fish. In fact, one day when we were on a field trip, we went to Berkeley Botanical Gardens, and they have a large pond there. And they had a lot of water hyacinths, a type of water plant, and other kinds of plants. And at the time, there were lots of garter snakes hunting. And you could see them diving into the water, and they would come up with a little minnow fish, and then they would swallow it. So they were hunting for the little minnows. And we have more of a drier, either a desert garter or a garter snake that lives more in the grasslands. Terrestrial. And so it's going to be eating slugs and snails and little tree frogs and things like that. So they're separated from each other, even though they're garter snakes. They're separated from each other. They're different species of garter snakes. Sometimes temporal isolation, where the time of day, different seasons, or something temporal, timing, is not the same between two species. So we have two skunks. One skunk is diurnal, means it comes out in the day. The other one is nocturnal, it comes out at night. So chances are when one is going to want to mate, they're going to mate with their own that they can see out. And if you're diurnal and you're out in the daytime and you're looking for a mate, well, the nocturnal skunks are asleep. So you have to pick another diurnal one. Okay? So they keep separated that way. Behavior isolation. There's all kinds of rituals and things that organisms put on, dances and so forth. And so, for example, birds are notorious for this. They even have it down to so many steps. One nod, look up in the sky, put your wings out, and if you don't do it just right, the female says, hey, I don't know you. and goes on and tries to find someone that she can recognize. So they keep separated, and that's the purpose of a courtship ritual, is to keep that separation unique. Okay? So here we have blue-footed boobies. I don't know why they call them blue-footed boobies. Do you? So this is a courtship. One step, another step, another step, another step, point, step, step, point. Got it? Like it? Want me to do it again? He's going, oh, there's the finale. Yes. She says, yes, I know you. Let's do it. Okay. Sometimes there's machinery that don't fit. Okay. There's differences that prevent mating from occurring. So you have snails, and you have, if you look at the coil of the shell, you have left, you could have left coiled shells, or you can have right coiled shells. And so only the snails that have of the same kind are able to line up their reproductive parts. And so just the coiling of the shell being on another side is an isolation for those things. Then we have gametic isolation, where one species, the species may all look the same, but they just produce different gametes. Although they live in the same habitat, environment, so you would expect them to be the same, but evolutionarily they've been producing different gametes for whatever reason. Okay? So we have many different kinds of sea urchins. We have green sea urchins, red sea urchins, purple sea urchins, and they can share the same area. So we'll talk a little bit about what happens when you share the same area. Any questions on pre-zygotic? Those are the basics. Okay. So what would be a post-zygotic isolation? If it's post-zygotic, can they produce a hybrid? You're pulling a quiet class on me. Yes? Okay. So that's the whole idea of this. Because you produce a zygote, obviously you produce an offspring. So we want to know, is that offspring viable or not? So we have reduced hybrid viability. Okay, if there's separation, we have it prevents the hybrid zygote from developing or from continuing its reproductive cycle. Okay? So we have a reduced hybrid viability. Okay, the hybrids just don't mate as well. Reduced, and the hybrids may be weak, may not live long enough. Reduced hybrid fertility. The hybrids, because they're hybrids, especially in the plants, but sometimes in animals too. The plants have a way around it, believe it or not. But animals, not so much. But you could have two different species, they'll produce a hybrid. But the hybrid, when it tries to handle those differences in chromosomes, can't pair them up. And so cannot make gametes because of that. Cannot have synapses with homologous chromosomes. Because to them, they don't have homologous chromosomes. And then we have hybrid breakdown. The first hybrid might be able to produce offspring, but those offspring eventually will get weaker and weaker, not carry the lineage. So in a way, those are barriers. Those are barriers. So we're going to look at a few. We're going to look at reduced hybrid viability, reduced hybrid fertility, and hybrid breakdown. So we have reduced hybrid viability. The genes can interact, but they don't allow the hybrid to continue development properly. Okay. So here we have examples in your textbook. They give you, salamander. Okay. Reduced hybrid fertility, even though the hybrids are vigorous, and you'll see that they're very vigorous, but they may be sterile. Okay, so we have a donkey. Donkeys are good for stubbornness. Okay, you can tell them stop working, and they'll work and work and work and work and work. Okay, don't listen to me. Go ahead, plow the field. I don't care. And horses are strong. They're big. They've got stamina. Okay, so the problem with the donkeys, they're a little small. Okay, you can ride a donkey as long as you and the donkey have the same idea of where you want to go. But the donkey won't be able to take as much weight and cannot take you as far. But the horse can. But the horse might hear a little rattle in the ground and say, "Oh my gosh, I'm not going. I hear a noise. It's a rattlesnake, and I will not step. You're on your own." Or you want to cross a creek, and this is the first time your horse is crossing a creek. Stops, and then you fall in the creek. I'm not crossing that creek. I don't recognize it. I ain't going there. Thank you, but no. A donkey would just say, "Oh, creek, so what?" So if we could harness the best of both worlds, right? And these were bred. We've artificially produced these. That's mule. Okay, but the only way you can get a mule is to find another donkey and another horse. You cannot mate the mules. One day I was driving out to the foothills, up to the mountains, and there was this huge ranch. And I recognized a mule. And I looked around, there's lots of animals out there. I looked around and go, "Oh, that's a mule too. Oh, and that's a mule too." They were all mules. And I'm saying, wow, this is a whole pasture land of mules. Someone had bred all these mules and maybe sells them or whatever. Or maybe this is a place where they rent the land and you bring your mules and they can eat. You just pay a fee. I don't know. Then I realized, well, they're not going to mate. They're not there together to reproduce. They're just there. They're just being held. And so the other day I was driving through a similar route, and I noticed that there was a whole bunch of cows. Well, they weren't cows, they were bulls. I said, "Oh, there's a bull." And I go, where's the females? I go, "Wait a minute. They're all males." I go, "I wonder if the farmer did that on purpose, because he wants to control the reproductivity." In another field I saw all cows. And then one field I saw one bull mating with one bull and a bunch of cows. And so that's what they do. They control that. Then hybrid breakdown, some of the first generations of hybrids are fertile. But when they mate with backmate with another species, then the offspring gets feeble and eventually sterile. So it doesn't work, in other words. After a while, it just doesn't work. So and then there's also plants too. You can produce a hybrid plant. In fact, a lot of our wheat, the wheat that we eat for bread and those sorts of things, the flour to make the bread, those wheat plants are triploid. They have 3 sets of chromosomes, and they're hybrids. They've been bred with 2 different kinds of wheat, okay? 2 different species of wheat. But they're not used. They have to keep all the 2 types of wheat and keep producing these. They will breed for maybe a generation or so, but it's not productive to do that. Now, here's some limitations. Biological concept says that they can, or the organisms can breed, right? They can breed. But what if you're dealing with an organism that doesn't? For example, what if you want to name the species of bacteria? They don't have sexual reproduction. They have a whole different kind of reproduction. Or what if you're looking in the fossil record? You don't know if these things bred or not. They're not alive anymore. You can't study that. You can't test that. In order for the biological species concept to be true and to be usable, it has to show gene flow. We have to see that gene flow. see gene flow occur between different distinct species, and it presents us with an entirely different kind of mixture. In fact, you can breed two bears, one grizzly and one polar, and you can do it with the male being a grizzly or the male being a brown bear, a polar bear, or vice versa. There's different names you can apply to those hybrids. Okay, and the hybrids basically are fertile. Okay, they just produce different. Well, they're different species, but then again, they're producing viable offspring. So now there's a problem. Sort of goes against our ruling thing. So, for example, grizzly bears and polar bears can produce grolar bears. Okay, grolar bears. That's a grizzly bear, Ursinus arctos, and Ursinus maritimus, polar bear. Okay. And this is the hybrid grolar bear. It's a cross between the two. And there's also a name for the switch. This is a grolar bear. I don't remember which is which, but if you switch them, the parents, if one being male, the other probably female, there's another name they use. I think it's Grizzly bear, or something like that. They use the other combination. Okay, questions on pre- and post-zygotic and definition. Okay, so let's say you're dealing with something and you cannot determine whether they are reproductively breeding or not. You don't know that, okay, or isolated. So we have morphological species concept. Define species by structures. Certain structures. So we can use it with both sexual and asexual. We can use it for bacteria if we want. In fact, we do it a lot with bacteria. We look at the morphology. We apply special staining, and we can see the differences between certain bacteria. Ecological species concept looks for a niche. Who can tell me what a niche is? Tell me what a niche.
Their place in nature, where they belong.
Okay, so like they belong in this, the top of this sand dune, or they belong in that tree.
Right.
That's it.
Well,
Then what's the
also like I guess you deal with like predatorial structure as well.
What do you mean predatory structure?
Like if they're the apex predator, or if they would be.
So if they're like a certain kind of eagle?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a combination of biotic and abiotic factors in the habitat where the population lives.
Okay. It's a combination of things. Okay. You two live in the same place? You live in Merced or Southern California someplace? Central Valley, maybe? Okay, so you're different species? Okay. You eat meaty stuff and you eat vegetable stuff? So, what do? Do you work? Do you drive a car? Do you like certain things to eat? And you wake up a certain time in the morning? Try to. And go to sleep a certain time in the morning. You have certain friends. You share the same friends? Okay. So, in other words, a niche is everything about that organism, not just where you find the organism. Okay? Where you find the organism is one of maybe 30 things. It's different. It's what they eat, where they eat, how they eat, when they eat, how much they eat, when they sleep, when they're up, when they change, what cycle. Everything is a niche. So that's a lot of criteria to compare. And if you don't match the criteria exactly, you're a different species. In fact, there is an ecological concept about niche. It's called the exclusion principle. Two organisms cannot share the same niche and survive. Two species cannot share the same niche. One will be eliminated. Okay? unless the two compromise and move away from each other. And then start to share different resources, which we'll see is also a cause of evolution. So, a niche means everything about the organism. So you can, if you know enough about an organism and their niche, then you can tell if they're different species. Okay. And like I said, there's all kinds of different speciations, and all kinds of different types of niches, all types of ways to try to determine what are reproductive barriers and what are species. So we only looked at, actually we looked at 3. I didn't do the last one. The fourth one here is phylogenetic species concept. And that is where it defines a species as the smallest group of individuals on a phylogenetic tree. What's a phylogenetic tree? What's phylogenetic mean?
Whether they share the same ancestry.
Okay, they have a certain ancestry bringing up, okay, and then as they develop, we can make a tree of their history, and we have branches and other branches, and they share a certain branch until we have all the little tips of the branches that are the organisms that live today. So that's phylogeny. And so if we knew what their basic smallest group of individuals on a particular branch, we know that they were all related. They're all related. It depends how we build our phylogenetic tree. So it can apply to sexual and asexual species as well. But we don't have to know if it's weeds or not. Okay. Questions? What does the word allo mean? Allo. Allele. What does allele mean? Allele. You had it. What's an allele? I don't know. No, not exactly. That's good.
Other?
Someone said a copy of a gene, allele. No, it's not really that. Okay, what? Allele? What's a gene? Do you guys have Form 8?
like an alternate version of something?
That's what a gene is?
No.
Let's do gene first, because many are stuck on the gene. Okay, then we'll come back. Okay.
A lot of times
Okay, so it's a sequence, a molecular sequence that determines a particular phenotype, a particular trait. Okay. What would be an example here of a gene?
blood type determining genes.
Okay, it could be your blood type. Okay, who wants their blood drawn? No, can't do that. Oh, well, let's try something else. What's another example? Hair color. Okay, a hair color. Hair color. Okay, hair color. What color? Okay, I don't know if colors are the real color or not, though. Let's do something that you
Eye color.
eye color. Okay, let's do eye color. So, who's got brown eyes? Who's got green eyes? Who's got blue eyes? You say the Central Valley has a population that's mostly certain groups. Who has color other than brown eyes? Okay, what color?
Kind of almost like black.
Black? Blue? Okay. So, what is the gene? What is the gene in this case? The gene is eye color. Okay? The gene is eye color. It's what color you are going to be in your eyes. The alleles are your choices. If you change the sequence a little bit, You're still going to have an eye color, but it's not going to be brown. It's going to be something else. So that's allele, other. It's the other choice. It's the other choice, allele. How many of you are patriotic? I thought so. Only 2 of you. I knew it. I could tell from looking at you. So what does patriotic mean? I'm patriotic, but I don't know why. If you're patriotic, what does it mean? You stand up for your country. So if you go to Russia, you stand up for Russia, right? You go to Japan, you stand up for Japan. If you go to China, you stand up for China, even though you're from the U.S., right? You stand up for the country that you're in. Oh, from only the U.S. So if you go to Japan and you're from China, you say I'm U.S. Right? Because you visited. No? What does P-A-T, patron come from? The Germans had a good phrase for it. The father country. Right? Patri means your country. Patriotic. You are for your country. You go to Japan, you were born in the U.S., you're a U.S. citizen, and you say, I'm a U.S. citizen. Okay? Because that's where I'm from. I'm patriotic. Allopatric, okay, allopatric means you have other country, other land. You're from other land. So, speciation is what? Who knows what speciation means? Speciation means you're going to interrupt the gene flow, right? Really? We just looked at what a species was, right? Speciation means you're making new species. Okay? How do you make new species? Well, if you're allopatric, means you can make new species. And we know that all of those species we talked about were a result of some kind of barrier, right? Some kind of barrier that interrupted the gene flow. So, if you're allopatric, means that something separated you in different countries or different lands, different places, okay, allopatric. And then because you were separated, you could not gene flow, and then you eventually produced different species. Okay. So what would be an example of that? What would be an example of a barrier, a physical barrier?
An island in the mainland.
An island. What else?
A canyon.
A what?
A canyon.
A canyon.
Mountain range?
Huh?
A mountain range?
A mountain range.
Oceans.
An ocean with the island and the continents. Okay? So those are things that can divide things up. Okay? Sympatric means means the same land. So you have species that are forming and they are reproductively prevented from crossing their gene flow, okay, even though they live in the same area. What would be an example of that we saw today? Okay, so they can live in the same area, but one's asleep, the other one's awake. What would be another one? What did the booby do?
Different things.
Right. You can be sure there's other boobies there. There's other birds, and they're separated just by their dance. Okay? You will find too that because species are in the same area, and even though they might have a dance or something, they're still going to try to do something to really make it so that they don't cross their genes with other species. Okay? So the species in an area where they're sharing the same area generally look more different from one another than if they had a physical barrier. If you're a meadowlark, like we saw previously, and you lived on the East Coast and the West Coast, you can afford to look just like each other, because if you ever get together, you can just sing your song. But you're likely not to even get together. And your song differs because you probably were away from each other. You know, that's how things change. And so they're going to look similar. They don't have to worry. They're being separated already. But humans live right next to each other, don't we? We're sympatric. We're not evolved. We're not speciated. I understand that. But we are very different. So there is some kind of interaction trying to go on. Okay? Maybe not necessarily nowadays as it was before, but maybe there's other things, but we don't know. However, things that tend to be right next to each other tend to be more different. Okay? If you had two meadowlarks, in fact you do, you have the field meadowlark, they're called the western meadowlark out here, it looks like the one you saw in the picture, and then we have a horned meadowlark. The horned meadowlark is only about that big and has these big tufts of feathers, and it's a meadowlark. It has songs like a meadowlark, and it lives in the meadow and all that kind of stuff. It has characteristics that put it in the meadowlark. However, it lives right side by side with the western meadowlark, which is about that big and is more brightly colored. The horned meadowlark is sort of brownish colored, and that matches with the soil. They're living right next to each other. So they tried to do one more, taking out an insurance policy. Okay, maybe our songs are so close, maybe we need to look a little different. Okay? So sympatric species tend to look very different. Allopatric species, maybe, can look very similar. So we have a pond and we have fish. I want you to study this. This is allopatric. Okay? They start out like this. This is allopatric, this is sympatric. And then I want you to look at this, and then take it one step further and read about the shrimp in your book. Okay? And so we're going to discuss the shrimp. When you come back, okay, next time I see you, I'm going to give you a test on the shrimp, so you'll see how you understand allopatric speciation. It's really very simple. But there's some questions you'll see. Once we start asking the questions, you go, oh my gosh. I don't know, because you don't know the concepts. You don't know the plants. Okay? So we'll do that next time.
You mean Wednesday though, right?
Yeah, Wednesday's your lecture.
Right.
Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.
So the quiz is on Wednesday.
Yeah, when you come here, I'll give you a quiz on allopathic shrimp on Wednesday, and it'll be at 1:13.
시간 속에서